The CFA Institute has just released the results from the first Level 3 sitting of 2023, and there's something extremely notable here. This exam, the February Level 3 exam, had the highest estimated minimum passing score that any Level 3 CFA exam has ever had. What is the Institute doing with the Level 3 exam then? Was it just that the question writers wrote questions that were far too easy? Was it that the standard setters happened to have used a slightly higher standard that Level 3 candidates need to have cleared to become charter holders than they've ever used in the past, which resulted in a higher percentage of questions needing to be answered right? Or is the Institute doing something purposefully different now with this Level 3 minimum passing score being at a record high, at least since the estimates have been recorded? It's looking like we have one big clue from the Institute about those questions, so let's get into it. Now, whenever I talk about the minimum passing score estimates for any of the CFA exams on this channel, it's important to note that they are just that, estimates. These are numbers put together by 300hours.com, which is a third party who asks hundreds or thousands of candidates for their results, looks at the score bands, and estimates what the minimum passing score must have been. What percent of the questions did a candidate have to answer correctly on that exam sitting to pass? And there was a change to this after the change to the computer-based testing method, the CBT method that all CFA exams are now administered with. 300hours.com says we should note that since computer-based exams have been used, the Institute now only gives the detailed results to people who fail a Level 3 exam. They don't give the detailed breakdown to those who pass. And because of this, estimating the Level 3 minimum passing score has a much larger margin for error. So this 62% number that we saw for this February sitting may not be perfect, but they still think they're getting a big enough sample that the numbers should be pretty close. And for the purposes of that conversation, that might just be enough. We're gonna assume that the number was right. And under that assumption then, why was it that the Institute required a higher percentage of questions to be answered correctly for a candidate to pass this exam than they ever have before? One solution lies within the computer-based testing methodology for Level 3 essay questions. If you're not familiar, the Level 3 exams used to always be administered half all essay answers and then half all multiple choice answers. The essay section was the AM or morning half of the exam, and the multiple choice section was the afternoon or PM half of the exam. If there's anyone who happens to be watching this video that passed the Level 3 exam under that old structure like I did, let me know in the comments down below, because you are a real OG of the CFA program. Anyway, since it's all done on a computer now, the Institute mixes in the essay questions with the multiple choice questions, and importantly, candidates have to type in on a keyboard into a computer screen their essay responses. Typing an answer in and then submitting that answer is a little bit more straightforward than the old essay style format where myself and many candidates actually didn't write out a full essay. We would just write bullet points answering each of the prompts in that question, and then if you got something wrong or you did something wrong, you'd cross it off. If you wanted to direct graders to your answer, you would circle that answer. You could provide little cues in your answer and structure your answer in a way that would be easy for the grader's eyes. None of that is possible when you're typing an essay style answer into a text box. So the theory that's getting thrown around is that the Institute had to make the essay style questions a bit easier on average, just because candidates have less leeway in how they answer, and the Institute probably has less leeway in how they grant partial or proportionate credit to someone who maybe gets a few steps of the question done correctly, but then the final answer is done incorrectly. There's just less availability for that favorable treatment with a text box. So the theory would say then easier questions, but a higher percentage of those questions needing to be answered correctly, which should match the relative difficulty, or the Institute would say, give us an equally qualified candidate from that candidate who may have scored enough answers correctly or scored enough points on the old style, a Level 3 exam, to pass that one to the structure we have now. Personally, I feel like this theory holds a lot of weight just because it seems unlikely that the question writers would have written far easier questions for a Level 3 exam accidentally, or at least maybe not for the multiple choice questions. And I know that the Institute has repeatedly reiterated, especially throughout the pandemic when the pass rates were really low, that they are maintaining an equally qualified candidate to set the standard for who can pass any CFA exam. If we trust the Institute and what they're saying, we wouldn't generally see a ton of deviation amongst the statistics coming from these exams. And again, this is the single highest minimum passing score estimate we've ever seen for a level 3 test. That's a relatively significant difference, and that means it probably lends itself well to a sort of structural change with the difficulty of questions and how they get scored and graded. Anyone who took the level 3 exam under the CBT method, please let us know. Did you find that the questions were approachable, but you had to answer in a very direct way in your text box, rather than something that is extremely difficult and you work through a lot of information and then kind of try to direct the institute to your final answer within that text box? I don't know how you do that on a computer with a keyboard. Just give us the insight on how those questions are actually asked and then answered. And if enough people sort of say that, yeah, they're difficult but direct questions that can be answered with a direct textual answer, then it may give a little bit of grounds to the theory that I'm talking about here. Easier essay questions and a higher proportion or a higher percentage of essay answers that need to be done correctly to pass. Now, there were also several stories about struggles candidates were having with answering essay-based questions using a keyboard in the CBT model on the level 3 exams, and those are a potential alternative for why we are seeing a higher minimum passing score estimate this time around. If you scrolled through Reddit, you would see countless examples, I would say over 100 examples, of candidates who sat down that day to take their level 3 exam, and the keyboard that was plugged into the computer that they were assigned, that they had to complete their exam on, the keyboard was missing keys. In some cases, more than half of the keys were not even on the keyboard. You could just see the little electrical stub that you see when you pop the key off of a keyboard. So those candidates were at a real disadvantage. Many of these candidates who were in the same boat where most of the keys were missing off their keyboard, they were asking the test center representatives how they should go about trying to answer their test. And several were told that they should just try to use their face against the keyboard and just smash their face into the little electrical stubs, because if you use just your fingertips, it's going to be pretty pokey and aggressive and you might end up with blisters at the end of a long exam. And the institute has confirmed that they felt those answers from the exam centers were appropriate. They recommended too that over, I think it was 3,000 candidates that had this issue, should have just completed their exam by using their face on their keyboard. That is, ramming their face into the popped off keys to try to type out a response. And while this certainly can be done, I know I've played with a lot of people who use a keyboard this way that have been on my teams in different video games I like to play. It's not as easy to just be mashing your face into a keyboard to answer, especially an essay style question. So it would make sense then that the institute would set a slightly higher standard just to weed out all of these face mashers so that they couldn't pass the exams because they complained too much about the hand that they were dealt. And sometimes you just need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and smack your face against some silicone to become a chartered financial analyst. So as always, thanks for sticking around to the end of this video. It's much appreciated. Drop a like on this one, subscribe if you haven't already, and see ya.